But it is precisely here that the theory of an erased civilization runs into fact-checking. The Perm Animal Style really does exist. It is a large group of cast ritual objects made of bronze, sometimes silver. They depict elk, bears, birds, riders, and fantastical creatures. These objects are found in the Urals and the Kama region. They were created by different peoples over many centuries. Archaeologists usually date such items to roughly the 7th through 12th centuries. These are not merely decorations. Some pieces served as amulets. Others were used in rituals. The most interesting thing about them is not some mysterious forbidden history. Something else is more interesting. Behind every small specimen stands a complex technology. First, the craftsman made a model from wax. Then he covered it with a mixture of clay, sand, and ash. The mold was heated. The wax flowed out. Molten metal was poured into its place. This method is called lost wax casting. Silver melts at a temperature of about 960 degrees. Bronze also requires strong, steady heating. The furnace must retain heat. Air must be constantly supplied inside. Otherwise, the fuel will not produce the necessary temperature. So this is not the accidental work of a solitary artisan. It is a craft passed down from master to master. Miners were needed. Charcoal burners were needed. They produced charcoal for the furnaces. Smelters, casters, and merchants were needed. Even a small bronze amulet requires an entire chain of people. Museums in the Kama region do indeed hold thousands of such finds. But it is important to understand the difference. Most objects are made of bronze. It is an alloy of copper and tin. Silver items are less common. Their number does not prove that an unknown empire with vast silver mines existed in the Urals. Silver could have arrived through trade. The northern lands actively exchanged furs, wax, honey, and hides. In return, merchants brought metal, fabrics, weapons, and coins. Trade routes connected the Urals with Volga, Bulgaria, Rus, the Caucasus, and Eastern markets. By the way, if you are interested in such details, subscribe to the channel. Here we separate real historical mysteries from beautiful but overly hasty conclusions. The preservation of metal cannot be judged at a glance either. An old object can sometimes look better than a later one. Everything depends on the alloy, the soil, humidity, and storage conditions. Bronze can become covered with a dense patina. It protects the surface from further destruction. Silver behaves differently as well. In dry soil, it can sometimes preserve fine details better than iron from a damp layer. Therefore, the rule that older means rustier does not work in archaeology. Not all finds from the Kulikovo field can be directly compared with objects from the Kama region. Their metal is different. Their soil is different. Their history of preservation is different. One artifact may have lain in marshy ground. Another may have ended up in dry sand. Appearance does not replace laboratory analysis. A separate subject concerns old mines. Ancient workings have indeed been found in the Urals. Local residents called them Chud mines. In legends, the Chud were often described as an ancient people who went underground or disappeared. But the word Chud was not the name of a single state. Russian sources could use it to refer to different Finno-Ugric peoples of the north and the Urals. The legend preserved a memory of old mines. However, it does not name the exact date of their creation. It does not provide the names of rulers. It does not leave a map of a vanished power. A mine requires experience. That is a fact. The walls must be reinforced. Water must be drained away. Air must be supplied. One must know where to look for an ore vein. But such skills could have been accumulated by local miners over many generations. Advanced metallurgy does not necessarily mean a vast centralized empire. But when it comes to maps, the real confusion begins. On European maps of the 16th and 17th centuries, Perm the Great, or Permia, was often marked. But cartographers often used this label not for a specific city. They could have meant a large historical region in the northeast of Rus. In old atlases, a fortress or city towers were sometimes drawn next to the name of a region. This was not always an accurate plan of a settlement. The artist could have used a conventional symbol. In this way, he showed that the territory was inhabited and important for trade. Therefore, one cannot automatically say that the map marked the modern city of Perm itself. Modern Perm was founded at the end of the 18th century. Before that, the Yagoshika copper smelting works, and a settlement attached to it stood there. Perm the Great and modern Perm are connected by their name, but these are not one and the same historical phenomenon. Great Perm was the name given to a large territory in the Upper Kama region. Its center was Chud for a long time. There were fortifications, trade, ecclesiastical authority, and ties with Moscow. The region became part of the Russian state gradually, through treaties, military campaigns, and administrative reforms. The history of Ryazan also seems mysterious only at first glance. Old Ryazan was destroyed after the Mongol invasion in the 13th century. The political center of the principality then moved to Pereyaslav-Ryazansky. Later, this city was given the name Ryazan. This was not the erasure of a place from the map. It was the relocation of the center and a change of name. The names of many Russian cities changed in the same way. Vyatka was called Klinov. Then it became Vyatka again. Later it was given the name Kirov. In different documents, the same city could be called by different names. For a historian, this is not a reason to declare a conspiracy. It is a reason to check the date, the author of the map, and the meaning of the label. But questions still remain. Who created the ancient mines? How far did the trade connections of the Kama region extend? How many workshops operated at the same time? Where were the settlements of metalworkers located? The answers are not sought in guesses. They are sought in layers of soil, in the composition of alloys, in traces of furnaces, in slag remnants, in the analysis of ore, and in the dating of organic materials. This is how simple bronze figurines become evidence of a great history, the history of the peoples of the Urals, and create their own visual language. Galena, the main lead ore, sometimes contains traces of silver, but even a proportion of 0.3% requires enormous effort. To obtain 1 kilogram of silver, roughly 330 kilograms of such ore must be processed. First, the rock must be mined, then it must be brought up from the mine, crushed, washed, roasted, and smelted. After that, the silver must still be separated from the lid. This process is called refining. 1 ton of silver means hundreds of tons of extracted rock, and behind every ton stand mines, furnaces, fuel, laborers, and skilled craftsmen. That is why discoveries of ancient metal objects raise so many questions. High-quality items do not appear out of nowhere. They require an entire production chain. Knowledge of ore is needed. Smelting skills are needed. Experience must be passed from one master to another. In the Urals, such traces have indeed been sought for a long time. Old workings were often popularly called Chud mines. They were associated with the mysterious people known as the Chud. Scholars treat this name cautiously. It combines different legends and does not prove the existence of a single vanished civilization. But the ancient mines themselves and traces of old extraction could suggest where to search for metal. The Petrine era dramatically changed the Urals. The state needed cannons, coins, tools, and weapons. The construction of factories began. Private enterprises belonging to the Demidovs and Stroganovs operated there. State-owned factories also appeared. In 1723, the Yagoshika copper smelter began operating. Later, Perm grew up nearby. The Motovelika plant was founded not in 1726, as is sometimes claimed, but in 1736. Within a few decades, the Urals became the largest metallurgical base of the Russian Empire. But something else is more important. New factories were often built where ore deposits were already known. This does not necessarily mean that Peter I discovered a ready-made industry of some unknown state. However, old mines, local knowledge, and surveyed deposits became a valuable advantage. The state did not begin its search from a blank slate. It relied on the experience of generations, on the knowledge of ore prospectors, and on real signs of metal in the ground. By the way, if you are interested in historical details like these, subscribe to the channel. Here we separate vivid legends from facts that can be verified. The most intriguing question is this: why do centuries lie between ancient workings and the industrial boom? The answer does not always come down to some secret catastrophe. Production could decline because of wars, changing trade routes, shortages of fuel and labor. Mines were flooded, shafts collapsed. Knowledge was often passed on orally, so some experience truly disappeared along with the masters. Russian legends about the Chud add a dark shade to this story. In the legends, the Chud go underground, hide in caves, and never return. This may be a memory of the displacement of the local population. It may be an image of old miners, or it may simply be a folkloric explanation for mysterious shafts and finds. When people discovered ancient ornaments, plaques, and devotional images, they saw unfamiliar symbolism. Sometimes such objects were regarded as pagan. Many items made of precious metals were melted down. That is why only a small portion of old artifacts has survived. The Perm Animal Style is particularly well known. These are bronze and silver plaques depicting elk, birds, bears. They are found in the Kama region. Some motifs resemble the art of the steppes, the Volga region, and the northern Black Sea coast. Similar ornaments do not yet prove the existence of a single people or a single state. Trade carries not only furs, salt and metal. Along with goods come craftsmen, technologies, and religious imagery. An artist could see a foreign object at a market. A jeweler could adopt a successful technique. Then local tradition would reshape the model to suit its own tastes. But such similarities cannot be called entirely random either. The spread of complex techniques requires stable connections. It requires roots. It requires places where people from different lands meet. The Urals, the Volga, the lands of Kiev, and the Black Sea region were connected for centuries. Old European maps often labeled vast expanses of northern Asia with the word Tartary. However, for cartographers, this word was usually a broad geographical designation. It did not always mean a unified state with common authority and clear borders. Europeans often knew these lands from the accounts of merchants, envoys, and travelers. Nevertheless, Great Perm was an important part of the northeastern routes. Goods passed through it toward the Urals. Some settlements grew. Others lost their importance. Names changed. A town could disappear from a map not because of a secret purge, but after a fire, a war, the relocation of a road, or an administrative reform. A separate story is connected with the church. In 1383, the Diocese of Perm was established. Its first bishop was Stephen of Perm. He preached Christianity among the Komi. He created a writing system for the local language and translated church texts. At the same time, Christianization was not a gentle cultural exchange. Old sanctuaries were destroyed. Pagan rites were prohibited. The new faith changed the familiar way of life, and the bishop's authority in the region was highly visible. The sources from this period often show precisely the church administration. Secular authority is represented more weakly and not always clearly. By the middle of the 15th century, documents mention Prince Mikhail Yermolaevich, the ruler of Great Perm. His origins and the early history of the local princely line remain subjects of debate. One can construct theories about serving men, warriors, and settlers, but there is not enough reliable information to confidently call his ancestor a warrior of Stephen of Perm. And yet the chain of events itself is clear. The ore wealth of the Urals attracted people for centuries. Ancient mines left traces. Legends preserved memories of unknown masters. Trade connected distant lands. And state metallurgy in the 18th century turned this potential into a powerful industrial system. The history of Great Perm is often reduced to a simple and convenient formula. A holy missionary arrived, created an alphabet, brought Christianity. The local people accepted the new faith. But documents in saints' lives paint a more complex picture. Stephen of Perm did indeed create the old Permic script. He translated liturgical books and preached among the Komi. However, in the Middle Ages, a mission was rarely just a conversation about faith. It changed power, courts, taxes, land, and trade connections. The hagiographic texts state directly that Stephen fought pagan cults. He destroyed sanctuaries, cut down sacred trees, destroyed idols. For the local community, these were not lifeless objects. They were symbols of memory, ancestral traditions, and the familiar order of the world. Such a conflict could not have passed without resistance. But it is important not to replace facts with speculation. The sources do not prove that Stephen personally led a full-scale crusade with a regular army, yet they clearly show something else. The Christian mission proceeded alongside the expansion of Moscow's political influence and church administration. In 1383, the Diocese of Perm appeared. The bishop became more than a spiritual mentor. He received judicial authority, lands, income, connections with princely power, and the right to influence the life of a vast territory. In those centuries, a diocese was an important part of governance. Resources were collected through it. New rules were established through it. A network of monasteries, schools, and church centers was created through it. And here an important detail arises, one that is rarely mentioned in popular retellings. The Perm land remained a frontier territory for a long time. The interests of Moscow, Novgorod, Vyatka, local princes, and merchants intersected here. Control over river routes, gave access to furs, salt, metals and goods that traveled farther. Therefore, the struggle for Perm was not only religious. It concerned money, land, duties, roads, the right to decide who owned the wealthy northern region. After Stephen, other hierarchs occupied the episcopal see. Their fates were not always peaceful. Some died in conflicts. For example, Bishop Pitterim was killed in 1455 during a clash with the Vogels, who are today called the Mansi. This speaks of the region's tensions, but it does not allow us to automatically declare every conflict a secret war against some hidden civilization. A historian must distinguish between fact, assumption, and an appealing version. The fact is that local peoples resisted the forcible transformation of their familiar way of life. They defended their sanctuaries, lands, and right to live according to old customs. Such resistance occurred in many parts of medieval Europe and Rus. By the way, if you are interested in details like these, subscribe to the channel. Here we separate real sources from sensational versions and examine history without simplifications. However, beyond this point begins the territory of legends. Some authors claim that Great Perm was supposedly deliberately erased from maps, that in its place there remained only the Stroganovs' estate, that later Catherine II gave the old name to an entirely different city. There is one real fact in this version. The modern city of Perm did indeed arise in 1723 as a settlement by the Yegoshika copper smelting works. In 1781, it received the status of a provincial city, but medieval Great Perm was not a single city that someone destroyed. This was the name of a large historical region in the basin of the Vychegda and Kama rivers. Its political and ecclesiastical center was Ust-Vym for a long time. Later the center of influence shifted, borders and administrative names changed. Therefore, the disappearance of the old name from individual maps does not yet prove a secret purge. Maps reflected the views of cartographers, copyists' errors, political changes, and differing ideas about borders. The same applies to well-known stories about the condemnation of memory. In ancient Rome, there was a practice called damnatio memoriae. The authorities could order the name of a disgraced person to be erased from inscriptions, their images destroyed, or public veneration prohibited. This was an attempt to deprive the enemy of posthumous glory. But this term cannot be applied without evidence to every vanished city or renaming. After Yemelyan Pugachev's uprising, Empress Catherine II did indeed rename the Yaik River as the Ural. The Yaik Cossacks came to be called the Ural Cossacks. The authorities wanted to weaken the memory of the rebellion. This is a well-known and documented example of a renaming policy. But it does not follow that every change of name conceals a destroyed history. The history of Ryazan also often becomes a basis for sensational claims. Old Ryazan was destroyed by Batu's troops in 1237. Later, the political center of the principality moved to Pereyaslav-Ryazansky. This city was subsequently given the name Ryazan. Both names may appear on maps from the 16th century, but this does not necessarily mean that two identical cities existed. Cartographers often retained old geographical names. They may have marked an ancient settlement, a region, or an administrative territory near the new center. The main question here is not even about the maps. Why is it so easy for us to believe that everything about the past was hidden from us? Because the sources are indeed uneven. Chronicles tell us much about princes, bishops, wars, churches, and monasteries. Far less often do they speak of the daily lives of peasants, craftsmen, and women. An ordinary person most often appeared in a text only during a disaster, trial, tax collection, or war. This does not mean that the people's history did not exist. It means that it must be sought not only in chronicles. It is sought in birch bark letters, in archaeological layers, in the remains of workshops, in hoards, in trade seals, in animal bones, in plant pollen, in traces of furnaces and mines, in the composition of metal in ancient ornaments. Novgorod shows particularly well how such research works. Chronicles do indeed devote less attention to trade than one might wish, but archaeologists have found thousands of birch bark letters. They contain debts, purchases, family quarrels, household instructions, court cases, and letters from ordinary people. In other words, the past is not silent. It simply speaks in different voices. The Perm Animal Style is also not proof of a mythical Tartary, but it is genuinely valuable. It is a distinctive artistic tradition of the peoples of the Urals region. Bronze depictions of people, elk, bears, birds, and complex creatures help us understand the mythology. The Chud mines also deserve serious study. This is what ancient workings and traces of ore extraction in the Urals are called. They remind us that the region's metallurgy has deep roots. However, the age of each mine must be established separately. Archaeology, wood analysis, radiocarbon dating, and slag analysis are used for this purpose. The version of Tartary as a single hidden civilization stretching from Europe to Siberia sounds striking, but historical sources do not support it in this form. On old European maps, the word Tartary often referred to vast and poorly explored territories of northern and central Asia. It was a broad geographical label, not the name of a unified empire with a common culture and government. The trade of Genoa and Venice was also important to the medieval world. Their merchants operated in the Black Sea region, the Mediterranean and Eastern markets, but there is no reliable evidence that they, through the Church, controlled the conquest of Great Perm. When documents are absent, the temptation is great. One can fill the gaps with a secret plan, an invisible force, a worldwide conspiracy. But historical honesty requires us to say, we do not know when we do not know. The Solovetsky uprising shows that real tragedies can be immense even without that. From 1668 to 1676, the monastery resisted the Tsar's troops. The cause was Patriarch Nikon's church reforms, a dispute over worship and fear of the destruction of the old order. The siege lasted 8 years. It was a harsh conflict. There were cannons, fortifications, hunger, betrayal, and a brutal reprisal after the monastery fell. But this episode was not erased from history. Documents, studies, and testimony from contemporaries have survived. The real mystery is not whether a secret force existed that destroyed everything. It lies elsewhere. How did memory change? Who had the right to write? Whose voices reached us? Why have stone cathedrals remained from some eras, while from others there are only pits in the ground and fragments of pottery? Great Perm is important precisely for this reason. It was a meeting place of worlds. Here, Finno-Ugric peoples, Russian settlers, church authority, princely interests, and northern trade came into contact. Conflicts emerged here. New traditions were born here. Old customs did not vanish instantly here, but changed over centuries. Artifacts remain. Old maps remain. The names of rivers and villages remain. Bronze figurines, traces of mines, ancient settlements, and church books remain. But they do not provide a ready-made answer. They require work, comparison, verification, and a willingness to abandon a beautiful version if the facts contradict it. Great Perm does not need an invented mystery in order to be fascinating. Its real history is already full of struggle, faith, trade, violence, cultural exchange, and the more carefully we read the sources, the more clearly we see the main thing. The past cannot be restored through a single sensation. It can be understood only when we ask uncomfortable questions and are not afraid of complex answers. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you soon.